Well, I think we can go ahead and kick off. Um, Hello, everyone. Welcome to the March 27th instance of the Bytecode Alliance SIG Doc working group meeting. On the agenda today, we actually have no items, and so we can start off by seeing if people have items that they want to discuss and go from there. I personally would like an update from Eric on how you feel like the WASI docs is coming along.
Yeah, so we're waiting on review and ultimately for that just to go live. I know a couple folks like Bailey have had eyes on it in the last day or two. So I think that review process is underway. And that's pretty much where that stands. Once that's in place, and we have kind of a clear process for adding to it and iterating on what's there, then we can start talking about next steps.
Calvin, Danny at Wasm.io, did you and Wasm Day, did you get a sense of any conversations around documentation or feelings about how people were feeling about the ecosystem there? Notes to bring back from that.
You want to jump in, Danny?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I guess, we were talking about wa.dev quite a bit, and it's still like really poorly documented. So I think we definitely need to document that. And it also is an opportunity to have things automatically documented, which we've talked about in the past. So yeah, we do have like there's so much documenting that we want to do, like around how to use the registry, like in the component model book and both on wa.dev. But we do have like features slash like refactoring stuff that I think we want to do first before we start sending people to things that we know that like need improvement. So hoping that like within a week or two we can do some of the development work that is necessary in order to be in a place to start documenting things and like pointing people in that direction.
I think we also had a bunch of documentation conversations in general, though, that I think are applicable to the group, though. Less about the registry stuff and more just documentation in general. And I know in Danny's talk, he highlighted the fact that the SIG is underway and that documentation is on people's minds and is an area of focus. And I think that, give some people some hope because there's a lot of things that we know need to be documented better for onboarding in this ecosystem. Also, related to the documentation stuff that Danny was alluding to on wa.dev, this week I'm enabling like user management stuff so we can give ownership to namespaces and like you can manage like what gets there, and there's definitely some BA related things. So we maybe follow up with David Bryant here on and how we want to go about that, and also the WASI group on giving like ownership to the right people to manage that namespace. Um, and also right now we don't have a feature to put markdown or like custom content because it's right now it's just rendering from the wit doc comments. But I mean, I'd love to hear what people want on things too and how they want things to work, because it's possible to like deploy like books, mark down books and other things, or whatever but it kind of wants. I hope that this is a useful thing to people, and that it might end up being, helping encourage some of the developer experience things that we're all trying to solve. So, I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts on what they want it to do. So, guess that's some thoughts.
Just to, because Sohan hopped in, just to kind of summarize where we were at. I was asking Danny and Calvin if they had any takeaways from being at WASM.io and WASM Day about the state of documentation. And they were talking about general ideas around documentation, which I would love to hear your thoughts on too as well, Sohan. But also with specifically with WA.dev about the idea of being able to add Markdown to it, or maybe even link to MD books. So folks have thoughts on that. Let me know if I didn't summarize that correctly.
Yeah, or even deploy a full book there too for rendering. However people want things to work. I mean, I just want to solve like usability problems.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I missed the last couple of meetings because I was at KubeCon and wasn't Mayo. I think it wasn't Con, wasn't Mayo. Yeah, I'll catch up with the rest of the conversation. I'm still getting from like 2 other meetings here, so still in that zone. I'll catch up in a bit about like the documentation and stuff once you'll get the conversation forward. I don't have any real input right now.
To reply to your part, Calvin and Danny, I think right now what I've heard about what WA.dev is just general excitement about being able to see the interfaces and not need to copy a bunch of folders of WASI like to their local development area. So I'm hearing just positive things on the documentation site. I think just being able to see them is a huge change. But I haven't heard wanting like a full MD book. And that's not something that I really desire for either. But I think that does line up with wazi.dev, the work being done there, because if we could link to wazi.dev for the wazi interfaces, or we could get rid of wazi.dev, if it's directly with the WIT. So I think that is a discussion that I don't think we should get rid of wazi.dev. I'm just saying there is some overlap there. So I get why you're asking that.
Cool. Well, if we had the ability to put Markdown on there, you could link to things, in Markdown. So that's, I think, a good start where we're heading. Conceptually, we're thinking of this like GitHub. So it's.
And you were talking, Calvin, I guess, about maybe being able to share it more broadly. What are your thoughts about? I mean, I'm sort of thinking about next steps, right? So getting more feedback from real users about what they'd really like to have and how to make it more useful. And you mentioned being able to set up sort of the virtual domains or whatever that's going to let you do to make that manageable. Just thoughts about timing or timeline. And I mean, we can help with that, or you could use the Zulip or whatever to kind of let people know that, okay, friendly user test drives or whatever, check it out.
Yeah, so there's 2 things that we're working on right now that I think are the last bit before I think so right now I'm adding like your ability to add configuration around like a registry space, so like add Markdown and other things like that, but also ownership controls, so like having multiple owners of a namespace and having all the user access controls, and being able to share like private packages and give other people permission. So all the things around that, like it's done server side, it's just like there's UI stuff that I'm working through on that. And the other half is the other set of things that we're working on that I think we're also kind of a little bit of blockers that we're actually almost done with, is Danny's been working on kind of refactoring the docgen piece. So of actually rendering the WIT docs on the page and confirming that it actually is doing the correct thing. And so we, a week ago wasn't totally correct. So we're trying to get it correct and confidently correct. And then I think we can, share it more. So those are the two things that we're trying to wrap those things up this week. So that's kind of where our known issues are.
Yeah, and I do think the other thing too is just like even regarding like adding things to the component model book. The other big thing is that uh like a lot of the tools like cargo component or WAC or WIT currently only have the ability to interact with one registry at a time, and each namespace is a distinct registry. So like I think pretty immediately people are going to want to like add dependencies of a package in a separate namespace than like the one that they're currently publishing to, and none of the like tools will let them do that right now. But
Not that org,
yeah, but
the single CLI.
yeah, the Worg CLI is currently set up to work across multiple namespaces, and cargo and all those tools I just mentioned, cargo component, WAC, WIT, they all use the Worg CLI. They're just not leveraging some of the APIs exposed. So once I finish this refactor, which I'm hoping can happen this week, that Calvin mentioned earlier, probably the next thing that I really want to dive into is getting the tools to be able to work across namespaces, because I think that's just going to be an expectation that everybody has that they're immediately going to bump into. And then, yeah, so it's like a shame that the blocker for the docs is there's just like a bunch of development work that needs to happen in the short term, but hopefully it should only take like a week or two before it's like ready to be documented well.
Sohan, I just saw your comment in the chat. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more for us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the only piece of feedback I heard from someone at the conference was they found the component model documentation a little hard to follow in terms of going from like one thing to another, right? So not the individual pages as in like, oh, I don't know what's being explained here, but what like the ordering was to go from end to end and understand the entire thing, right? So they felt that they had to go to a page that was somewhere, towards the end of the documentation to understand something that was at the start, which involved a lot of like looking for information and that sort of thing. I didn't get specifics, unfortunately, but that was just the one piece of feedback that I heard. Yeah.
You think that was the component model book that they were referring
Yes.
to?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good feedback.
And for folks with maybe more expertise in something like this, um, it's more of a question, but I know how we can actually test out this, right? It could be just a very individual thing regarding that person, but like how do you, over a group of, I don't know, like whatever number of developers who don't necessarily have a lot of context about component model but are interested in it, which I think will eventually be our target audience. How do we get them to like sort of use the test and get like some sort of feedback, basically, right? So I think, yeah, we'll have to maybe think of something like that, like in terms of some general feedback, scoring, something, just to get a sense of if that book works. And yeah.
I think it would be great to like link to like Ryan Levick's talk, thing like that when that comes online too, because he went through the component model stuff in a nice way during WASM.io. And like, I don't know what people's thoughts are about linking to that sort of stuff in the component model book, but I thought that would have been a nice intro for people.
I would give that a big thumbs up, especially because he's a big contributor to the doc. And I think he probably got a lot of feedback that people liked his talk because kind of immediately afterwards he started iterating on some of the documentation there. So I think it'd be great to link to his talk and other talks that help conceptualize it.
I don't think it's online quite yet. They're kind of dripping out the YouTube releases there, but as soon as that does, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, to some degree, this dovetails with a topic I was going to mention just as a thing to think about or to get feedback on, which is I was thinking about it. So we got the component model book, we've got the work that's going in now to wazi.dev, we've got other things coming along. There isn't really, if you think about the Bytecode Alliance .org website, we talk about our projects and we provide information to kind of get people introduced and off onto some kind of voyage of discovery with respect to our projects. We don't currently say anything about documentation. I don't think we mentioned the component model book, for example. I don't think we mentioned wazi.dev. And given the current state of it, maybe that was understandable, but with the work going into the book and the other things, and just in general for SIG documentation, so kind of as a broad topic for SIG documentation, what might we want to do, at or on the website to create more visibility for some of these kind of resources, point people at them, if not literally as part of bytecodealliance.org, then someplace else, where else, documents.something.something.something or what's, which is like, where do we be as we began to get more useful documents, videos of talks, other things, is it sort of in scope for this group to think about how are we making that more discoverable for people and readily available for them? Because it sounds like everybody goes to a conference, there's conversations, they're like, yeah, more documentation would be great. This could be better. How about adding that? Just as a thing to think about, what might we want to try and put in place in that regard?
Are there, this is more of a follow-up question to David. Are there any properties that the Bytecode Alliance owns in terms of like a Twitter handle or whatever, any of these social media, that sort of thing?
We have a very, very lightweight, given the sort of infinitesimal size of our marketing organization. We do have a Twitter account. Bytecode Alliance is too long to be a Twitter handle. So Bytecode Allies is the Twitter account that we have that we very rarely use, mostly for event announcements and project announcements, retweeting things. So we do have, we have the website, we have a very minimal social media footprint. We do have the opportunity to kind of we have the news that appears on the website. So we have a news stream that we do feed more real content through, which is probably a better place to put some of this stuff for us than on social media. And then, tweet to add it, links to it or whatever. So we do have mechanisms like that. We're just not actively managing them. We more refer to things that our member organizations or our projects do than things that the Bytecode Alliance puts out there itself.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like for instance, like say if there is an official Bytecode Alliance YouTube page, we don't need to actively sort of like create content on that if there is, like no bandwidth and things, but you could also just create playlists of talks from other conferences that relate to the Bytecode Alliance, right? Like Ryan's talk or any of the WasmI talks. So I guess based on what media people are representing the things that we want them to, we could like collate those things as well.
Yeah, and I think there's probably different categories of things we'd want to do, like the component model book and wazi.dev are significant investments and enduring resources that we want to make sure as many people know about as possible. And so they don't require, there's not a lot of, this week's news from the Bytecode Alliance kind of thing. And so it is low maintenance, but high value. And so we definitely want to try and, we don't have a place to highlight that from a website perspective now, like we highlight our projects. And so if that's something that would be good for us to figure out how to add, sort of fundamental resources for people, then I think we'd have the opportunity to do that. And then if we had other places where we wanted them to go look, like we generally encourage people to go to our Zulip server because that's really the discussion hub for things. And so, we can refer people to other resources. That's easy for us to do. And I think we should think about how do we do it well. So, but it seemed like for the component model book, for example, it's been around for a while, and people have seen it and used it, but we don't make a reference to it anywhere on the organization's website, which seems like something we could and it's, figure out how to do it. So you put more of these resources in place, like we've been talking about. How do we make them easy for people to find them, or point people someplace, and then from there they can figure it out. We don't really have a hub or anything like that for the documentation resources that we're beginning to put together as a SIG.
It's just I was taking a moment to look at the website, and the website has a projects tab, so we could add documentation to that tab pretty easily. And it looks like there's a lot more projects than there are on that page. So I was just wondering what the criteria is for being on that page in general.
If the project list there is specifically for the projects that are considered hosted projects by the Bytecode Alliance. So certainly not all of the projects, and not everything. If you look at the Bytecode Alliance org and GitHub, you'll see lots of stuff there that's not reflected on the website. So we sort of, the projects page, and again, it's been that way for 2 years since the Alliance formed, was specifically about the hosted projects. Then there's the whole concept of hosted and core projects that the TSC defines. And so that page there is specifically created to talk about those projects. And over time, the expectation is there will be more of those projects, and that collection would grow, but that's sort of stewarded by the TSC.
Do you think we should add the component model link in that main paragraph on the homepage of Bytecode?
Well, I think there are a couple of things we should probably do. One is, I don't think we talk about the whole SIG space anywhere, right? So we mentioned the TSC and the board, and we talk about the TSC is responsible for the Recognized Contributors Program. So I think we could probably dial up a little bit more, because we have other SIGs, and it would be good, to create some more awareness for what the other SIGs are doing too. So I think there's probably a little bit to be done in various places on the homepage, maybe on the about page where we talk about the TSC to kind of highlight, we got this whole, great SIG model for getting things done. And then the question becomes, okay, well, so where do we want to highlight that work, and where would we highlight those things? And then for SIG documentation, a particular value that SIG documentation has, I think, is to see to it that there is great documentation for WebAssembly and for the Bytecode Alliance's efforts. And so we should figure out how to talk about that, and where we might, that all doesn't have to live on bytecodealliance.org, but it would be nice to be able to say, okay, from here, here's where you should go to check this stuff out. Here's the component model book. Here's WASI.dev. Here's a great talk, or here's our YouTube channel, et cetera. So those kinds of things, I think we should think about pointing off of bytecodealliance.org to those other places, and having that be a less daily, weekly changing view of things, but just get people pointed off in those directions. So yeah, I think, Kevin, that would be someplace in that structure. And if we can fit it in meaningfully, it's a good documentation exercise. If we can fit it in meaningfully to the structure we already have, that's great. Let's identify those spots and put it there. To Kate's point about the projects page, there's other work that the SIGs are doing, work that aren't, projects in the, formal TSC hosted core project sense. And we might want to find ways to talk about those things too. So I'm open to the idea that there might actually ultimately need to be more pages on the website. If that's in the end where we think it makes the most sense for things to go.
Let's link to things as many places as we can.
Yeah, exactly. You could imagine, sort of from a user narrative, is like, great, curious person thinking about Bytecode Alliance. Maybe you're a developer and you want to know more. Maybe you're a journalist and you're trying to, write a story for the New York Times about WebAssembly or something. It's like, what would we want to, where would we point those people? What would we tell them, and where would we point them to keep them moving in their journeys? So think about that. If you have feedback, or if we think it's something we could, want to put more concretely into place is a SIG documentation thing. It's like, where do we want people to go to learn how to learn about WebAssembly and the work that we're doing? And I'm open to that being something that doesn't currently exist, but that we think ought to.
I think it's a great idea. I mean, just like even a learn tab, that's probably the right word.
Okay, we might be hitting the end. Does anyone have any other topics that they want to cover? Awesome. And just a reminder, if you do have an agenda item for next time, you can PR it into Bytecode Alliance /meetings. And I'll make sure we have, and then I also wanted to circle back when we started creating these meetings, we said every week in part because we were pushing for the conferences. Do we feel like we want to keep the every week cadence, or do we want to move to every other week?
I think bi-weekly is probably fine. I mean, we have communication channels on Zulip to coordinate on things.
Yeah, biweekly sounds good to me.
Yeah, I think biweekly with Zulip and whatever to keep things moving. I think, want to make sure we can nudge people along to review the PR for wazi.dev and that sort of thing, just to keep progress moving. But every other week sounds okay to me.
Sounds good. Well, then we can plan for our next meeting to be April 10th, which is convenient because that's what Wazi Doc said. Or sorry, what Bytecode Alliance meetings says. And then either Cal or like either Danny or Nat or I can update the Zoom link and we'll send out a new ICS for folks who want to be able to import that to have the every other week occurrence. Awesome. Talk to you all then.
Sounds great.
Right.
Thanks all.